page is not there. The live page is not there. Where is it put? Why are we not live? Oh, Ross. Okay, I don't have a live thingy. You're not showing me on this either. Where can I see comments? Where can I see people? Your white noise thing, sort that out. Why is that oh, live session, okay, good. Alright. Walaikum salam, Amelia, mashallah. Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Jazakumullah khair, akramakumullah. Shazad is working on the white noise, whatever it is. He'll fix that in a second. I hope you guys are doing well. Jazakumullah khair for turning up on the Monday. You're killing us, Gus. What are you killing us for? These are the killers. In the class. Okay, Lala, just for you. Alright. Alright, assalamu alaikum to all everyone online as well. Good to see you guys. Inshallah today should be a bit more inclusive of you. You know, to be honest, Masakeen, they're feeling a bit left out. 2.5 years they enjoy nothing but full attention. My eyes are like this, like that, like that. Yani, you know, I couldn't escape their comments, every one I'm responding to. Now, yani, nasya mansiya. Just the thing forgotten and gone forever, that's it. I got to see the screen once last time and they made such a big absource they did. Shakayat. So inshallah today I've got the thing right in front of me so that they get a little bit of thingy, bit of love. Yes? No? You can't fix it. Might be rain. Allah's like, yeah, it's raining. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3. Testing, guys, can you hear me? Is it clear now? Is it better? Let's see whether it's Romana thinks it's okay. Salma doesn't. Ruqayya doesn't. This is so I'm not too sure who to believe. Some saying it's okay, some saying it got worse. And Mesa says the same. And Mesa is يعني القول الفصل يعني. As for Ijaz, I can't believe that Ijaz is saying that I can't hear anything and thinking whatever. Ijaz and lives literally 3 minutes away. Yeah? You lazy fish, get here. Yeah, that's why you can't hear. No wonder you can't flip in here. Come into the room, then you can hear. Nani Qasam. Literally 3 minutes. Literally 3 minutes away. Right. Right. Okay. So you know what I thought we'd do today? Um, yeah. By the way, those who are not happy with the sound, then the what we will do is that we will upload we got the Edirol recording, like the stereo thingamajig, and then we can transpose that over, or we can put it into the thing so you can listen to it as opposed to the video, which is probably better anyway. All right. Okay. All right. Mason reckons it's okay now. Let's just move on. So what I wanted to do today, we're in the section of so whatever it is that you've done, remember what you've done. Yeah? Because you fixed it last time as well, yeah? So obviously brain cells were that was something else. Right. So what was something else? Can you note both of them so that where's Maji going? Ras. Did you guys eat your sweets? You got it all sorted, yeah? Alright. Let's bring me up the what's it called? The text. So the text that we're looking at, alright, the paragraph that we're going to look at, but we're going to basically focus on this one. وَلَا قِرَاءَ عَلَى مَأْمُومٍ وَيُسْتَحَبُّ فِي إِصْرَارِ إِمَامِهِ في إصرار إمامه وسكوته وإذا لم يسمع لبعد لا لطرش. And then maybe we might get to ويستفتح ويستعيد فيما يجهر فيه إمامه. I don't think we'll get to that. Alright, so the follower does not have to recite, although it is recommended to do so when the imam is silent or whenever he pauses or if he cannot hear him because he is too far away. Unlike the case when there is a specific hearing problem for him, meaning the follower, right? We spoke about that last week. He also recites the istiftah, that's subhanakallahumma bihamdik, yeah, and the isti'adha, that's a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, when the imam recites out loud. So another interesting statement there that's going to need explanation from the Hanabila, from the Hanbali school. So we're still actually on the opening line here, right? The follower does not have to recite. Imam Shaykh Uthaymeen alayhi rahmatullah, he's taken the opportunity to now go full in on the issue of reciting behind the imam, which I kind of indicated last week. You would have got a clue to it last week. It is one of the big debates in fiqh. You know, you get like some major ones, like obviously there's thousands, in fact tens of thousands, yeah, accurately tens of thousands of masail, issues in fiqh in which need to be resolved. But and of course there's difference on all of them. There's a difference of opinion on all of them. However, it can be argued that a lot of them can be seen quite conclusively to a certain kind of opinion. There's a lot of agreement on those issues. But then there's maybe a few hundred, maybe a few hundred, yeah, maybe a few hundred, maybe around 100, which are very difficult to deal with. And you just got to go with it. Ijtihad is being exerted at its best. It's more than just a simple case of this hadith is weak, your hadith is weak and my hadith is strong. No, we go past that, we got rid of the hadith issues, and now we're struggling how to work out what it actually entails, what the meaning might be different, how we're understanding the meaning could be different to how another person understands it. So this issue, you got a little bit of an insight into it. Immediately you hear the statement. I'll give you an example. I mentioned last week that, you know, the Hanafis, they have the extreme X opinion. As I called it extreme, it's not extreme at all, but according to the others, it's the extreme opinion, because they said there's no recitation, neither in quiet prayer, neither in the loud prayer, and that's it. Even when Imam Muhammad bin Hassan al-Shaybani, who's one of the great companions of Imam Abu Hanifa and who the madhab is built upon, and he's of course huge Imam, there's a narration from him that the Hanafis debate, because he said actually it is recommended to recite in the quiet prayers, kind of like a more so common sense kind of position, but absolutely banged down by the rest of the Hanafi school, that this narration is weak. This was a statement that goes against his more authentic one in his other books, which is, by the way, a good argument and true. And so therefore the argument that this actually is not authentic from him has weight. So the Hanafi school is very comfortable being on this side, saying there's no recitation, there's no nothing. And we'll have a look at a few of the evidences for that in a second. The Shafi'is are on the other extreme. Again, I don't want to use the word extreme with the meaning of extreme. I just want to show opposites. Yeah, opposite is the better word. So they're on the other opposite. The other opposite is that you have to recite, not just in a quiet, which makes sense, but in the loud one as well. So even when you hear the Imam reciting, you still need to recite as well, because this is an individual obligation that you are not, that's not lifted from you. This is about a requirement from the prayer, because the prayer is invalid without it, and they have a plethora of evidence. And here's the thing, the Hanabila and the Malikiya, it can be argued, and these things can get pretty kind of pedantic, but it can be argued that all three of, both of these Imams, if we're just sticking to the four Imams, they have three separate opinions that are narrated in their schools, and three opinions that are often narrated from just the Imam. Now we're used to that in the Hanbali school. Imam Ahmad, different narrations from him that he said this is recommended, this is allowed, and this is obligatory. All three have been narrated by different students and whatever, and then it's a science about which one are we going to go with, which one's going to get the biggest clout and then be taken as a position in the madhab. If it becomes a position in the madhab, then we say it is the madhab. That's the madhab. If it's a position that is considered to be the base opinion in the school, it's al-mu'tamad, the established, well-established position. And then rarely will other Hanbalis go against it. But then other times you will see it's a riwayah, there's a riwayah of Ahmad, there's a narration from Ahmad, and there's another narration from Ahmad, meaning that there is different stuff. Now, when you see that from an Imam, you get an idea that, he himself is not very, one possible explanation is that he himself was not clear what it is. Another explanation is that he changed different opinions at each different time, right? That's very well known with Imam Shafi'i, for example, in that he had al-Qadim and al-Jadid before coming to Egypt and after he went to Egypt. He has a certain, if you like, set of positions before he traveled, and then after he traveled and he experienced more and got into more discussions, then he changed it. Some other schools will use that against the Shafi'i. They will say to the Shafi'i scholars, they will say, well, you know what, even your Imam, he agreed with us in the old. Obviously, then he went to Egypt and it all went, Pete Tong. You can't even say Pete Tong anymore. That's been ruined, you know that? For the last 20, 30 years, that's what we say in London. It's all gone Pete Tong. But now the guy turned out to be a right flipping disaster, innit?
Oh, did he?
Yeah. Full weirdo, pedo, all that behaviour, yeah. So, anyway, it's all gone Pete Tong. Anyway, so they used to blame, meaning that they will find little kind of things. So the interesting thing about the Malikiya and the Hanabila is that it could be put forward, and some of their followers would disagree, but it could be put forward that there are three positions from both of these Imams that are exactly the same. That it is, to recite, is recommended, that it is allowed, and that it is disliked. And if it was a quiet prayer, for example, then that it is obligatory, that it is recommended, and that it is allowed. You can see like it comes down a bit. So in the loud one, neither Malik or Ahmad would dare say it's obligatory. Right? Like what Shaykh Uthaymeen is arguing. None of the Hanabila as an established position or the Malikiya, as far as I know, have ever said it is obligatory to recite when the loud prayer is when the Imam is actually reciting and you can hear him. Right? But they did go that far as to say that in a quiet prayer, yeah, we support the idea of reciting obligatory, or it is recommended, or it is allowed. And of course, that's what we're just covering right now. That's actually the Hanbali position is what we're reciting, what we're doing right now. It says the follower does not have to recite. That's the actual official Hanbali position. Does not have to recite, meaning it is permissible. Then it becomes boosted up to recommended, although it is recommended to do so when the Imam is silent. Alright, now when the Imam is silent, what that means is in the salawat sirriya, in the quiet prayers. That's what he's referring to. Right? So in the Dhuhr and Asr and the Dhuhr and Asr, that's what's being referred to. When the Imam is silent, so they're recommending in that. And what have I said? I've said that there's another narration which would indicate it's permissible, and another narration which would indicate that it's obligatory. So you've got a spectrum of opinions, and you get a feel that clearly it is wanting to be more it's pushing towards being more required if the prayer is quiet, and it's being pushed away from being required when the prayer is loud. And I'll just put it out there, just for the sake of just getting the names out and whatever. Sheikh Uthaymeen and the Saudi scholars generally, and I don't mean all of them, but a few of them, they're of that opinion that you have to recite, like the Shafi'i position. And we covered some of these hadith last week, and I want to speak about this I want to just look at one or two of these hadith in a minute, where Sheikh Al-Albani, and in our modern time, even though he's not from the fuqaha, but in his opinion, following the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah is what would be considered the middle road opinion. Middle road opinion, a lot of scholars follow this. It makes a lot of sense. Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, for example, in Saudi, and other senior scholars in Saudi also follow this opinion, which is a common sense one. I just call it the common sense one. It's the middle one. In the quiet prayers, when you can't hear an imam reciting, you recite the Fatiha. And you recite everything else as well, because you can't hear the imam. And as for and you have to, not you recite, you have to recite. And as for in the obligatory prayers, because you can hear the imam, and if you are following the imam, then that following of the imam bit by bit, even if you don't actively recite, is like a recital. The recital is for you, you're hearing it, internalizing it. And we have a hadith which would indicate that you're not meant to recite over the imam. That's good enough for me, and that allows us to reconcile. That reconciles the different narrations. Now, it doesn't reconcile every narration. It does, and that's why Sheikh Uthaymeen, he and I'm going to now just read just from him, all right, and see how he ends this point. So he says, on page 174, Fizza was asking about, can the mu'tamad and the madhab positions be different? Yes, they can. How and why? Don't ask me, because that changes from madhab to madhab. This is madhab specific differences on what they give the terms, right? So the Hanbali specialists will say that in our madhab, the madhab is when these two imams agree. Like this, they have names and identifications, whatever, things which I'm not so interested in myself, but it is an art, right? So the phrases that are used between the different madhabs to be something to be called al-mufta bihi, for example, and al-madhab. That which we give fatwa by when we're so all of these technical terms. This is the madhab, this is the official position, this is the mu'tamad, this is the established position, this is the mufta bihi, which can be used to give fatwa. The defining differences between all of these phrases and all these realities differ from madhab to madhab according to the strength of, the number of, and the identity of the different scholars within that madhab. But they can be different. Okay? Anyway, so oh, Sugar, you know what? I think I got that wrong. I just threw Pete Tong under the bus. It was Tim Westwood, sorry. It was Tim Westwood, not Pete Tong. No, sorry Pete Tong. Sorry, Pete Tong. Although he looks a bit weird as well, to be honest. Everything's a bit weird, isn't it? It's all gone Pete Tong, isn't it? So, sorry, I just badnamed him, yeah? It's Tim Westwood, sorry, Tim Westwood. No, don't check, yeah? Just focus on the dars, yeah? Alright. So have to recite means have to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Yeah, this is entirely a discussion around Surah Al-Fatiha, nothing else. Okay, just Surah Al-Fatiha. All right, now, so yeah, just look what Sheikh Uthaymeen says at the top of 174. He says that if someone was to say, there's the hadith of La Salat liman lam yaqra bi Fatihatil Kitab, hadith Bukhari, hadith Sahih. There's no prayer for the one who does not recite the opening of the book, right? If someone was to say this hadith is general, okay, and the ayah of وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ وَأَنصِتُوا, when the Quran is recited, then listen to it carefully, intently, and be quiet, right? Then the generality of the hadith has been specified by the ayah. Okay? So Sheikh says that, yeah, there's no doubt that the ayah is covering all the Quran and is covering the Fatiha as well. And he's saying, Sheikh Uthaymeen carries on, he says, وَأَنَّ الْمَأْمُومِ إِذَا as for the follower, if the Imam is reciting the Fatiha, then he should be quiet. But this general ruling should also be attached with the other general hadith which says that there is no prayer without the Fatiha. How are we going to combine it, he says. Okay? And that's exactly what he did. After he turned around from Salatul Fajr, and he turned around and he made a little bit of he got disturbed in the prayer, possibly some mistakes. ثَقُلَتْ عَلَيْهِ الْقِرَاءَ, which means that, he's kind of like struggled through it, might have just lost his direction. We're not sure what kind of mistake it was, but clearly it's the disturbance we spoke about, right? So when they finished, the prayer was finished, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَقْرَؤُونَ خَلْفَ إِمَامِكُمْ. That perhaps you guys are reciting behind me, behind your imam. And they said, absolutely, that's true. Then he said, don't do that except with the mother of the book, because there is no prayer except without it being recited therein. This hadith is a hadith which is sahih, narrated by Abu Dawood. Not a hadith of Bukhari or anything like that, but a hadith of Abu Dawood. Sheikh says this is a clear text, nassun sarihun, in the issue of the prayer, loud prayer, because the Fajr is a loud prayer. And so he's clearly said to them, don't recite, but do recite the Fatiha. So actually, it is very difficult to argue this hadith. And actually, I think someone last week asked that question, right? They said that, well, how are the Hanafis going to argue against this hadith? How are they going to argue against that there is no prayer except by the Fatiha of the Kitab? And Ahnaf, and I'm just going to pause here, just take a time out from what Shaykh Uthaymeen says, just to give you an idea of how vast fiqh is. The first thing that they'll say is that actually we disagree that there is no prayer without the Fatiha. That this hadith itself is authentic, that just this hadith as a statement, right? Narrated by Bukhari, just outside of the story of the Salatul Fajr and so on. And there's absolutely no doubt that the hadith is authentic, but it does not indicate that it is a rukn of the prayer, an absolute fard of the prayer. And that's because the Hanafis are very big on the concept of khabar ahad. Khabar ahad we've spoken about before in the last few years or in the early years of logical progression. That's basically understanding that a hadith are divided into different categories. So a hadith is looking at its chains. And the number of chains is what gives a hadith its strength. And a hadith is strengthened in a couple of ways. The first is its chain itself, the quality of the chain. When we say it's sahih, when we say it's da'if, ultimately this is looking at the individuals in the chain, and we are making assessment of the people. Are they reliable? Are they good? Are they honest? And if they're all good, then we say this hadith is authentic. If the hadith itself is not just good and people with memory and whatever, and they're not dodgy, whatever, but they are imams as well. A hadith with someone like Imam Malik in it, with Abdullah bin Umar in it, with Salim, his servant in there, and you're talking about imams of hadith narrating, like the leaders, then the hadith shines even brighter. So the hadith becomes even stronger. And that's why people study Bukhari and they look at his chains, because he spends his whole life on those chains, selecting the perfect chains, rejecting so many other hundreds and thousands of hadith which are authentic, but not as authentic with as perfect a set of narrators like what he has. So that's one angle from how a hadith becomes authentic individually. Then a hadith starts to take more weight if there are various chains coming off it. So different groups of people. So it's like if I go out and you're all in here and I go out into the sky, I say, guys, the moon's on fire, right? And as me as a statement saying that, it's like it doesn't matter that I'm trustworthy. It's so incredulous that there might be some doubt. But if suddenly a ping goes off and your sister in Pakistan has just message, look at the moon, it's on fire, and then your mate in America just pings and says the moon's on fire, and we're starting to get chains now. So this is a chain of narration, that's a chain of narration, and the big thing here is that they're very distant, right? That like that person's not connected to me in any way. So where did they get it from? And where did I get it from? And where did I get it from? The more chains that you have in the more varied locations, in the more varied ways, is giving strength to the original narration. This is called tawatur. This is tawatur, when it's starting to be narrated in so many different times and places by so many different people that this is impossible to be a lie. Once you start getting 10, 15 of those, you know this is fact, and that's the end of the story, right? Here's the thing. What do we value, or what do we, how can I say, how important is it really for something to be mutawatir? How important is it, right? Do we have to have tawatur for everything? Or is mutawatir an added bonus for certain very, very special things? And the scholars have differed over that. Now you'll often hear, when it comes to Quran and the ayat of the Quran, that the ayat of the Quran, every single one, and I don't just mean in the riwayah of Hafs, which we all recite, but I'm talking in the other riwayat, whether it's Shu'aba, or whether it's this, or whether it's Warsh, or whatever it is, okay? That every single ayah from every single qira'ah to the riwayah itself, it must be narrated in a mutawatir fashion. Not good enough for just one companion to bring it and that's it. And it will become then basically equal to the word of God, right? And so a lot of scholars, they put that as a condition for the Quran, that every ayah must be mutawatir. And every ayah which isn't, and there is that kind of concept out there, that there are different masahif of particular individuals in which they had an extra one or an extra two verses which was not mutawatir narrated, and it becomes clear that either at the worst level it's a fabrication and a lie or a slander campaign against an individual, or it's a easily understood example of a personal ijtihad, like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an. He would sometimes use some ayat as dua, and so it would not be immediately obvious that it's part of the mushaf, right? And so I want you to know that this mutawatir kind of concept helps a lot when it comes to the Quran, and you need obviously that level of certainty. But we've got to be careful here, because if we keep talking about mutawatir being this thing that to require certainty, we would then be kind of denigrating the non-mutawatir, and that's exactly where the difference is. So the argument goes that if a hadith is not mutawatir, then it's a hadith ahad. It's a singular narration, except that they don't mean singular. They mean so low numbers, it might as well be singular. So if it's narrated once, just one version of a hadith and not been mentioned anywhere else, no other single kind of chain for it, then it's called gharib. It's like a strange kind of whatever. And if it's a couple, then it's aziz. And then if it's more than a couple, then it's mashhur. And basically, so there's like subsections of a singular hadith, a khabar ahad. And obviously what they're trying to argue is that if there's only one narration or a few chains of a narration, how can you take this to be a very, very definitive proof? And therefore, we're not going to treat it the same as a mutawatir hadith, even if it gets up to 8 narrations. And some said 9 narrations. And that's when they argued about numbers, right? That after 9 or 10, we're into mutawatir kind of territory. But when we're in the 5s and the 7s and the 3 kind of various chains, then we're in the singular type. Now, Ahl Sunnah, and I don't want to make out like the Hanafis are not from Ahl Sunnah, but certainly the Ahl Hadith and the majority of scholars, and one of the reasons why, by the way, that the word Ahl Sunnah is used in this context is because quite a few of the people of Bid'ah adopted this opinion, actually. They adopted this approach. And if you think about it, like, I'll give you an example, Hizb ut-Tahrir, right? Hizb ut-Tahrir is obviously a modern creation, just a political kind of Islamic political group or whatever it's called, yeah? And I tell you what's interesting about Hizb ut-Tahrir is that it's just a political group with an Islamic vibe, of course, and they do their da'wah, they've got their call, established the khilafah, etc., etc. So it should be a political group. However, as a political group, they actually have an ideology. Certain key tenets, right? And part of it is that they considered the khabar ahad to not be acceptable to establish certain knowledge. They've kind of cherry-picked this, like a number of the groups of the people of Bid'ah throughout history, especially in old days, but then now that's just one example, okay? That they picked up from the differences of the scholars and they use it for their own political purposes. And you know generally that when a group or when a people are establishing an identity with such a condition or such a prerequisite that we, as part of our belief, do not accept, then there's normally a benefit in them for it, right? There's normally something going on. right? You should always be aware of that in general when you hear these kind of things. You remember in Al-Adab al-Mufrad back in the day, I spoke about how the feminists and the movement around that, the modernists, is very important for them to try to cast doubt into certain companions, right? And here's the thing. From a hadith point of view, if you're studying hadith, then you'll find that the scholars of hadith have mentioned that this was a questionable incident of Mughir ibn Shu'bah, that this is a questionable incident of Abu Hurairah, this might have been a mistake, whatever. And it's been done in an academic fashion, not in any way, at any moment, casting any aspersion on that person's quality or character. Once that discussion is there, people will jump on it. And they'll use it for their own purposes. So in modern times, modernists, feminists, this kind of folks, they jumped onto hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr, for example, big enemy of theirs. Because Abdullah ibn Amr has key ahadith which indicate the role of a woman or the prohibitions of women in certain aspects of life. And so if you can conveniently, without betraying your agenda, push aside a companion and bring him down, then we bring his hadith down. And when we bring his hadith down, we've got the green light then to establish our own aqidah. And you'll find this all through Islam, and all the groups do this kind of stuff. So my point is that they took this idea and they made their identity Hizb ut-Tahrir on the Khabar Ahad as well. Is there some kind of point to it? I don't think so. The majority of scholars reject it, all right? The idea that a singular statement is not certain knowledge is not what the evidence would indicate. The companions, whenever they heard a narration from another single companion, they took it as certain knowledge. And we have nothing other than that to consider, right? But let's not get back into that because it's a big discussion. We've done it before. And you'll hear often the classic example of the changing of the Qibla. The changing of the Qibla is the one which is the most devastating argument against this idea that a single narration is not knowledge. In Bukhari, we have the hadith clearly that the entire Jama'ah are praying towards Quds, and then a companion goes past and says, hey, I just prayed with the Prophet ﷺ, and the Qibla has changed. All of them change. Full in the act of ibadah, in the middle of the prayer, took it as certain fard requirement, and they all turned direction round. And other evidences along the board. But most important, where is the evidence for your statement to bring aspersion onto the companions? So it's not like it's entirely rejected. There's no doubt that a hadith which is mutawatir is something that people should have even more confidence about, but we shouldn't need to denigrate the others. It's like those who attended Dominion. I was saying that to make someone great, you don't need to make the other one rubbish. You know what I'm trying to say? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does that very, very subtly and very nicely, that He will praise Dawood, and then He will say Sulaiman alayhi salam is amazing. And we get that Sulaiman alayhi salam is better, but we didn't see that Dawood had to get cussed as a result of it, right? And so ultimately, what's their argument? They said that this hadith of that there's no prayer for the one who does not recite the opening of the book. This is a hadith which is khabar wahid, and a khabar wahid cannot establish obligations. It can only establish wajibat. So it's not like they're miles off. They're not saying that it can only establish a sunnah. They say it can only establish wajib. Now you might turn around and say, hold on, wajib is obligation. Well, you're right, it is. Linguistically and in the madhabs, it is. However, in the Hanafi school, it's not. Hanafi school is unique. And that's why I said, all this issue about intra-madhab issues, you got to go back to their people. Don't ask me. They've got loads of specific definitions which are unique to them. So in all of the madhabs, you say wajib. Wajib means obligatory. That's it. Wajib, fard, lazim, all mean the same thing, right? Whereas in the Hanafi school, they are very, very accurate and they make differentiation between them. And I've covered this before a couple of times and it's been a few years, so it's worth covering again. And that is that the wajib is a level down from obligatory fard. Exactly, they'll call it fard or fards. And then it'll be wajib, and then it'll be sunnah mu'akkada or mu'akkada, all right, and emphasize sunnah. So it's somewhere between highly recommended and absolutely obligatory. So you'll say, well, what English word is that? Well, there is no English word. And that's why it's called wajib. However, we understand it by its consequences. That's the easiest way to understand it. When you can't define something, I've said to you guys before, in fiqh, when you're struggling to define something, define what it isn't. Right? And that's useful. I said to you guys right at the beginning, that fiqh is an aqidah. And that's a nice way of understanding fiqh. Right? I could be saying here, fiqh is the derived rulings that are blah, blah, blah. Wasting time, man. Just say, you know what fiqh is? It's not aqidah. And when you say that, you give the impression that aqidah is very serious, very strict, no differences of opinion allowed, straight down the barrel, that's it. Whereas fiqh, more flexible, different opinions possible, legal interpretation, places of ijtihad, you get that feeling for it. So what were we talking about? Wajib. We're finding it difficult to find an English word for definition of wajib. So we define it the other way around. A wajib is something that if you deny, you are not a kafir. But a fard is something which if you deny, you are kafir. They define it via its consequence. And if you understand then this, you realize that what they're doing is that they're basically bringing down the tension on the concept of wajib. They're bringing the tension down. So if a person said, absolutely I deny this, I don't think this is Islamic, I don't think this is from Islam, right? Whether a person's saying that because he lost his mind, or whether he actually believes that, or whether because he's a modernist or whatever, someone who denies something which is wajib, like think about someone who says that you don't need to pray, no, I can't think of a good example. Someone denying something recommended. No. Huh? Miswak. Someone denying the miswak. Yeah, someone saying, I don't know, I've got to think of a good example here. Someone saying that you don't, say it again? Niqab. Yeah, niqab a bit different. Some scholars consider it to be obligatory. That's a bit, praying sunnah, but yeah, that's also a bit disingenuous because in general we are obligated to follow the sunnah. Okay, in general we're obligated to follow the sunnah, so they'll argue. The siwak I think is a good example. I think that to say that absolutely, siwak is a good example. To say that the siwak or to brush the siwak is not from Islam. That's a good example. Yeah. Alright? It's not from Islam. I reject it. The hadith that I see, I reject it. What's the most a person's going to say? They'll say that, do you mean you rejecting the concept of hadith? He'll say, no. I just reject the idea that act is from thinking the evidences don't suggest it. The evidences do not support it. Right? Whereas if someone says, I reject hijab, right? I reject Salatul Fajr. What are you on about, bro? Later. Right? It's a whole different ballgame. Right? So, like I said, sometimes it's what, and obviously now, as Fizza has said, right, that's why the Hanafis never upgraded witr all the way up to fard. But and you realize that this is not just some kalam fadi, and you realize that actually you do need some of this kind of, moves to try to explain things. Like, for example, if you say to a person that witr is sunnah, yeah, which technically it is, that's a disaster, isn't it? Imagine you left it like that. Well, then you know how poor people are with their sunnah, especially new generation, right? Sunnah is like non-existent, right? As long as it's not obligatory, right? Now, we've legally given witr the same category. But it's not, is it? You're not taught that at home. You're not taught that in any madhab. You're not taught that in any school. You're told how serious it is. But how serious can we make it when we're saying it's still restricted by the definition of sunnah? So the Hanafi said, leave this to us.
It's not obligation either, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah, but this is why they made wajib.
What's ironic is that, we're arguing these different branches, yet they're the ones who, with this wajib category, have maintained or established some of the sunnah acts.
A very important social argument, that. if they didn't have, what Bob's is saying is that if they, the Hanafis, did not come with these moves, like for example,
We come with the moves, for example.
yep,
And we don't pray the
and we exactly,
Yeah.
you get what you're saying, right? We just kept it at witr, kept it at sunnah
An obligation.
and an obligation, and therefore that's why the other madhahib struggle to find people to do the sunnah. You get what I'm saying? Now, you see those boys, and they don't mess about, and they saw makruh and they saw haram, and they realize that Paks are taking liberties, so they bring in makruh tahrimi, right? Which is basically like makruh and haram kind of, you know what I mean? Yeah. And by the way, just so that you get it, and again, I have actually covered this a couple of times in LP. Makruh tahrimi and tanzihi, the two categories of makruh, come from the same basis, khabar ahad. And basically what they said is that if the hadith is mutawatir, then it's haram to deny it, and kufr to deny it. But if you were to deny something which is makruh tahrimi, then it's not as serious. It's serious, but it's not as serious as we're gonna expel you from Islam. There's like some difference about it. We're gonna give a person some excuse, yeah. So that's what's happening in the background here. So, but yeah, the social argument is there. The social proof is there. These are the folks, okay, that made witr its own category of wajib and scared the heebie-jeebies out of everybody else by using the word wajib. And so we all took it super serious. And then until you come to the Salafis and they say, oh, it's only sunnah, right? They're like, I've been betrayed all my life, right? No, what your parents did is a good thing, right? They made you really strict upon the witr. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever does not pray the witr, he's not from us. You see, that hadith is sahih, right? How you understand it is a difference of opinion. But they said, that is serious, man. And scholars went all the way and said, all kinds of things. So, and commands of the Prophet ﷺ, يعني فَلْيُوتِرْ, this is in the Arabic a command to obligate the person to do witr. And anyway, my point is that the social argument can be made. Academically though, is that the correct thing to do? And that's the problem. And that's when academics and culture, social, and the wider interests clash, and scholars have got to try to be responsible, try to promote that which is, because if you open up the floodgates, then and this can be applied to so many things. Like cryptocurrency is a very good example. I've never had any doubt that cryptocurrency is permissible. I should say that cryptocurrency is a currency. The argument at the beginning was that it's not, it's X, it's Y, it's Z. For me, obviously from my background, I can see what what you guys are kind of struggling to understand over cryptocurrency. I'm still struggling to deal with the electronic money, let alone paper money. I see it all as a blag, right? But because maybe people are younger, or because people don't go into the economics so much of finance and understand, they look at a paper and say that's absolutely legit. What they don't realize is there's a load of bakwas as well. There's no backing behind it. There's some argument that's you have to have trust in the system. But then that's the same for crypto. You've got to have trust in the system. And that's the same as e-money transferred. When you see numbers on your thing, you go up, go down, money goes in, money goes out. You don't know what's happening. You don't actually physically. So the Ummah has always had big hurdles to get over when these new monetary forms have been brought in. Now, even though it's clearly a currency, we've been highly warning for folks, don't get involved with it, be careful with it, and everyone's just embraced it. And even if it is halal, it's not what true industry, true value, true work, true whatever should exist as. And the more cautious you are, the less you lose. The less you're living a life which is not a realistic, stable life of hard work and the whatever. I have my own NFTs, by the way. No, I don't.
Quick question about hadith.
Yes.
Like wajib is a Hanafi kind of maneuver.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is hadith
only in their school.
Yeah.
Wajib, of course, exists. Yeah.
But is hadith ahad also something specific to the Hanafi madhab in the way that they understand it and apply it?
No.
there are fuqaha, individuals here and there that are sympathetic to the idea that the khabar ahad, nowhere near the majority, still the absolute minority, but there are scholars here and there that are sympathetic to the idea that the khabar wahid or khabar ahad is a lesser form of knowledge than something which is mutawatir. There is the argument. And like I said, there is something there. Anyway, back to the point. The Hanafi said this hadith is a khabar ahad, and therefore it can't possibly make it obligatory. And they consider therefore, and that's why in the Hanafi school, the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha in a prayer is from the wajibat of the prayer, not from the arkan. And I want you to know that they use another hadith for that position as well. Those who have studied fiqh as-salah, al-hadith of al-musi fi salatihi, the one who messed up his prayer, right? And if you remember that hadith, he comes in, he prays, radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ then says, go back and pray, and he keeps making him go back, and he goes, I can't do it anymore, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And the Prophet ﷺ said that when you stand and make takbir, and then when you stand and then recite ma tayassara min al-Quran, right? Then make ruku', and then goes. So he mentions a few things only, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And those few individual things, some said 6, some said 7, they became the arkan, because they basically said in just these few minutes, or in just this 1 minute, the Prophet ﷺ didn't go into the big details of all the obligations and the X's and the Y's and whatever, but just laid down the most fundamental parts of the prayer. And that's certainly the Hanafi argument. And they said, where's the Fatiha? If the Fatiha was so important, where is it? And the others will turn around and say, what do you think recite from the Quran is? Right? And they'll say that recite from the Quran means anything from the Quran. It doesn't mean the entirety of the Fatiha. So I want you to know that there is none of these positions that is without evidence. There is all interpretation, it's all X, Y, there's some discussions. Now, let's, now that you know that particular position, what I want to speak to you about is a hadith. This hadith is narrated by Imam Abu Dawud, all right? Hadith number 826. And it's one of the versions of the hadith that we just spoke about just now, about the prayer of the Salatul Fajr. Prophet ﷺ narrated by Abu Huraira, and there's controversy over this hadith. I'll mention it in a second. That the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he completed a prayer in which he was reciting out loud, and then he turns around, he goes, who is the one who was yatanaza, competing with me, arguing with me with the Quran, right? In the prayer right now, not the Quran. And one of the people said, it was me, yes, Ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I was saying to myself, what is wrong with me that someone is fighting to wrest or to take away the Quran from me? Trying to take it away, wrestling with me, just competing with me. And so the people stopped reciting. With the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in prayers in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited out loud. After they heard that, okay? Now, look at this hadith compared to the others. This hadith states that the Prophet ﷺ is in the prayer, doesn't mention the prayer, just that it was a loud prayer. Same thing happens. He can hear voices, turns around, says, who did that? What's going on? And that person said, yeah. And he said, this shouldn't happen. In other words, yeah. And then that stopped. After that moment, no one did that in the loud prayers. Now, question. Who said, and that stopped? Very good. Salan just put the hadith up there. Just coming down a little bit. Let's see the rest of the riwayah. Abu Dawud said that this is narrated by Ibn Uqayma. Aywa, very good. Now I want you to look at this, okay? I want you to look at this. Let's have a little discussion about this hadith. Imam Abu Dawud said that this hadith has been narrated by Ibn Uqayma. All right? This is obviously a hadith of Abu Huraira. Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, the companion. Right? Question for you. Look at that part. When the people heard that from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they ceased reciting along with him at the prayers in which he recited out loud. Who do you think saying that? Who is it? Definitely not. The Prophet ﷺ, obviously, right? He doesn't speak about himself like that, yeah? So we can get that off the table. So who is the obvious one? Abu Huraira. Who is the most important one? No. There's a chain, isn't it? Yeah? Who is the most important one? Abu Huraira, right? It's obvious that it is Abu Huraira, and the one that we're looking for is Abu Huraira because he's the narrator of the hadith, and the narrator of the hadith is knowledgeable about his situation more than any other people, right? As we say, الراوي أدرى بروايته من الغير. يعني the narrator is more aware of the riwayah than anybody else. So his statement will be a very, very powerful statement, and it will put the cat amongst the pigeons. It really will, right? Because then, what argument can be made? Who's like thinking outside the box? If we take this to be, as Shaykh al-Albani said, that this hadith is sahih, okay? That this hadith is sahih. And I want you to look at this chain, by the way. This is narrated by Al-Qa'nabi. Who narrated it from who? Imam Malik ibn Anas. Imam Malik has this hadith in his Muwatta. This hadith for Imam Malik, who he narrates himself in his Muwatta, is one of the key reasons why he does not recite in the loud prayers. Because of this hadith. So, look at who he took it from. Ibn Shihab. Who is Ibn Shihab? Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. Imam al-Zuhri. Imam of al-Tabi'een. Right? One of the greats. And Ibn Ukayma al-Laythi, who some scholars, by the way, said is weak. I just want to throw that out there. But anyway, on the authority of Abu Huraira, this hadith is sahih. I'm happy with it. But what is the real point of contention? The real point of let's not get to the contention. Let's assume this hadith is authentic as Shaykh al-Albani considers it to be. What does it indicate? Or what could it possibly indicate? Keeping in mind the hadith that we mentioned of Abu Dawood, in which the Prophet ﷺ said that don't recite Fatihatul Kitab, don't recite the Quran except by the Fatihatul Kitab. Or Quran rather, sorry, I should say. Mother of the book.
There's no statement of the Prophet stopping.
Okay. Alright. That's correct. The Prophet ﷺ doesn't say anything. But the narrator says it, which is very good for us. So, what would the consequence be? Or what could a possible argument be developed?
And if it was not allowed or prohibited, it is wajib upon the Prophet to tell him not to do that.
Okay.
And he hasn't told him not to do that.
Okay.
He put it in the reverse. What's wrong with me?
Yep.
That I'm contending with somebody in the prayer.
Okay.
But he hasn't then reprimanded the other person. He's remained quiet, but he said it in an open statement, saying that in essence,
So how do you reconcile between the two?
Between
This hadith that doesn't mention the Fatiha, this hadith doesn't tell them to recite Fatiha, and the hadith Abu Dawood which says
this could be something else. It doesn't specify that it's Fatiha.
I think the translation says that they ceased reciting along with him, so maybe they were reciting in the gaps.
yeah, maybe, but that's ihtimal, yani that's not the big issue here. In both he was disturbed by people reciting. In both he told them, don't disturb me, don't recite. In both they stopped, right? The difference is that in the Fajr one he said, but carry on disturbing me with the Fatiha because you got to recite Fatiha. That's the big thing. Shaykh Uthaymeen's entire premise, he's got hardly anything to go with. All the evidence is against him except that hadith. And that's what was asked. The whole lesson's been about that statement, by the way. The whole lesson of today is how do we get around this statement?
It's might be a bit far-fetched, but is the hadith on the Fajr one specific to Fajr because there's no sign of the where people have the other.
That's an interesting one. I haven't heard that before, but yeah, it could be argued that yeah, it's specific, but you'd have to bring a real strong argument to specify it because specification is a big shout. Something far more obvious, guys. Far more obvious, far more simple. Far more simple. If you are trying to argue your case that I'm not going to recite Surah Al-Fatiha in a loud prayer, what's your obvious thing to say? Bring it up, let's see if someone's answered it online. Carry on. Oh, give it up. No, nobody else said it. No. Come down. No. Interesting. No, we'll come to Widad. We'll come to the Idraj in a second. As I said, don't assume there's any idraj. Just assume this is the statement of Abu Hurairah. That's what I said with that. Assume that it is legit. Yeah? What would you say if you had these two hadith? What would you say? The answer is you'd say this is the abrogating hadith. That's not common sense position. You would say that look at who's the narrator, look at the age, look at the kind of reality. That hadith that's there, that mentioned it, we can't argue against it. The hadith is authentic, it's there. The only thing that we can determine is that it happened quite early. This hadith, where it's here, is authentic as well. It doesn't mention the Fatiha. We can't have, if you got these two hadith, imagine we didn't know the dates of both of the hadith. Could it be possible for that one to abrogate this one? It doesn't make any sense, right? Whereas this one to abrogate that one would indicate that first you had to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, but now you don't, because the Imam can, the Imam's recitation is enough for you. Do you get what I'm saying? And so now what we've got is the Hanafis making this argument, the Malikis making this argument, a number of scholars, Shaykh Al-Albani himself.
But if it's an abrogation, he has to specify, do not recite. He hasn't specified, do not recite. He's left it open.
He, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that can be argued that he didn't specifically take away out the thing which he obligated. This is a very good point. In usul, when you have something which has been established, you've got to have an equal strength to remove. Some of the scholars said that. It's not agreed upon, right? But that is a point. And also I want to say in general, that abrogation is something that you should really run away from. Abrogation is your absolute last resort when it comes to reconciliation, right? It's just something that you got to run from. The problem is that without abrogation, we're stuck. How do we explain away that statement of, but you have to recite the mother of the book? And so that's where the Hanafis are coming from. Now, what are those guys going to say? They're now going to go on the attack, as Widad mentioned. They said that this is the idraj of a Zuhri. What's going on here? This is the addition of Imam al-Zuhri himself, not from Abu Hurairah. Abu Hurairah didn't say a single word. The one who said, and then they stopped reciting after the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the loud prayers, was a statement 3 guys down the line. Imam al-Zuhri makes sense. He's a teacher explaining the hadith, going through the commentary, and you know, if I say, and if I was saying, for example, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, who's there behind me arguing with me in the Quran? And a man said that the Prophet, and then one of them said, it was me, Ya Rasulullah. And then the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, oh, well, don't do that. What's wrong with me? I thought someone was arguing with me. Then they stopped. Right? How do you know what point the hadith stopped and my commentary stopped? That's where the problem is. And then they stopped and they never did it again, kids. They never did it again. That's the teacher explaining the obvious point here. So you can't tell very easily. You get what I'm saying? Yeah? I want you to just think about that. So there is a potential argument that it is actually the statement of a Zuhri and not the position of Abu Hurairah. So the argument goes back and forth, and that should now make you think that this really is a difficult issue. Let's have the adhan and then we'll carry on.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar,
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar,
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah, حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Alright, Bismillah. So, yeah, the basis for abrogation in this argument here is that they are both authentic, and this is the only way that they could see. Now, I'm just going to now cover what Shaykh Uthaymeen says so that we can start wrapping this point up. I also want to say that we said before that the recitation of the Imam, where was that? Man kana lahu imamun fa qira'atul imam lahu qira'ah. And I said to you that, this hadith is mursal, this hadith is considered by Bukhari to be weak, but there are other scholars that consider it to be authentic. Actually, many of the fuqaha took this hadith as authentic, many of them. From our current scholar, Shaykh al-Albani used to consider this hadith to be sahih. Hasan, for whatever it's worth. But the point is that from the early scholars, a number of scholars accepted this, right? And they said that it's supported by the general ideas that the Imam and yu'tamma bih, he's meant to be followed, he is the Imam and everything that he does for you, and the concept that he covers your mistakes. So it's not a massive jump of imagination to think that his recitation when he's reciting for you is covering you, especially when you're following it, right? So the argument can get quite more deep. Anyway, Sheikh says, so we can divide all his opinions into the following. The first statement on the top of 175, al-qawl al-awwal, is that there is no recitation for the ma'mum at all, neither quiet, neither loud. If he was to stand there doing absolutely nothing in the prayer, his prayer is correct. This, of course, is the Hanafi opinion. Shaykh Uthaymeen says that this is da'if jiddan. This is very, very weak. How can we establish that? The second position is the opposite. You are obligated to recite it in the loud and in the quiet. That's the Shafi'i position. And the third position is that it's obligatory upon the people to recite in the quiet prayers and not in the loud prayers. Because in the loud prayers, if the Imam recites it, then the recitation is for everybody. And the reason and the evidence that the recitation is the recitation for everybody is because the ma'mum yu'ammin ala qira'atihi, that he says Ameen. Right? So he's listening, he accepts it, he says Ameen, and then it is accepted. And when he says وَلَا الضَّالِينَ, and we say Ameen, ولولا أنها قراءة له لم يصح أن يؤمن عليها. If it was not a recitation for him, then it wouldn't be right for him to say Ameen. What's he saying Ameen for? So he's taking it as a recitation for himself. He's accepting it as a recitation for himself. And Shaykh Uthaymeen says Al-Mu'ammin means the one who says Ameen, على الدعاء, who says that to another person's dua, كفاعل الدعاء. The one who says Ameen to a person's dua is like the one who made dua in the first place, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quotes, says about Musa alayhi salam, وَقَالَ Musa, right, in his dua, رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ آتَيْتَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَمَلَأَهُ زِينَةً وَأَمْوَالًا. Okay, that my Lord, you gave Fir'aun wealth and splendor في الحياة الدنيا, in this world. رَبَّنَا لِيُضِلُّ عَنْ سَبِيلِكَ, only for them to lead the people astray from your path. رَبَّنَا اطْمِسْ عَلَى أَمْوَالِهِمْ وَاشْدُدْ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ فَلَا يُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى يَرَوُا الْعَذَابَ الْأَلِيمَ. Oh Allah, obliterate their wealth, okay, and harden their hearts, so that they do not believe until they see the painful punishment. Yani meaning, let them drown more in their desires and delight. Give them more and more. Yani make it like they're so happy that we're on the right path. Yani you will look at you, what have you lot got, right? And clearly we're on the right path of our atheism or our pantheism or our shirk. Look how our wealth is. And the dua of Musa alayhi salam is that, Allah, give them more, make their hearts even more hard, so that they do not believe until it's too late. Imagine that. Just think about the implication of that dua. What did Allah say in the ayah after it? قال, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَدْ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَتَكُمَا, right? That I have responded to both of your dua. But it was only Musa alayhi salam who made the dua. Kuma is Harun. Harun did what? Ameen. As the Mufassirin said, he said Ameen to his brother's dua. Musa alayhi salam, Allah said, I've accepted both of your arguments. That's why the person who says Ameen is part of the game. So they said this is an evidence. What else can we say? وحينئذ نقول إذا إذا قرأ الإمام الفاتحة وأنت منصت له وأمنت عليه فكأنك قارئ لها. And so if you sit behind the Imam and he recites and you say Ameen, then it's like you're reciting as well, and therefore you don't need to recite the Fatiha in that situation. And this is the chosen position of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Alright? This is the Ibn Taymiyyah position. This is also, as I said, one of the narrations from Malik. It's also one of the narrations from Ahmad bin Hanbal as well. It is certainly the class position as well, even though Shaykh Uthaymeen is not having this at all. And as I said, on the top of 176, he says, and the hadith of Abu Huraira, it doesn't mention that they should read the Fatiha. He uses it generally. And he goes, also, they said, يعني generally, if you say to كيف نقول للمأموم اقرأ وإمامه يقرأ, how can we tell the guy to recite while the Imam is reciting? And then what's the meaning of the Imam then? عبث, يعني عبث, يعني for the Imam to recite and you're telling him to recite. Well, who's he reciting for then? Right? So he's just busy in his world, and what's the whole point? Right? لأن الفائدة من جهر الإمام هو أن يستمع المأموم إليه ويتابعه. يعني the whole point of the recitation of the Imam is for us to listen and to follow it, to be affected by it, to you know. So anyway, وإلا فلا شك أن القول الذي فيه التفصيل له وجهة نظر قوي من حيث الدليل النظري. And this is the point. Shaykh Uthaymeen says there's absolutely no way that I can deny that this point makes a lot of sense. And if you think about it, common sense, this argument makes sense that, you know what, you should just listen to the Imam's recitation. However, لكن لا يستطيع الإنسان أن يقول بخلاف ما دل عليه حديث عبادة بن الصامت وعليه يتهم رأيه في التصرف بالأدلة. He goes, however, it doesn't matter how much sense you want to say in the world. What are you going to do with the hadith of Ubadah ibn Samit, the hadith of Abu Dawud? What are you going to do about the hadith where he said that the Prophet ﷺ then told him around, but yani, don't recite Quran when I'm praying, but do Fatiha. What are you going to answer? He goes, so we're just going to have to park our common sense to the side and we have to recite. And that is what Shaykh Uthaymeen's position is. He's stuck to that. And he's never going to leave that position. Okay? وعلى هذا, he says, فالقول الراجح في هذه المسألة, the preponderant opinion in this issue is that you must recite the Fatiha, every single person, in every quiet and loud prayer, and it will never be excused except in one scenario, and that is when the Imam is in ruku', and you come to the salah late, then you jump into the ruku'. If there's time to say it and you know, then you would still even do it, he would say. But if you know that there's not a chance, then you have to jump into the ruku'. He goes that even if it's going down into ruku', you have to stand and try to say as much as you can before you then jump in late, but you can't miss the ruku'. This is the only exception for the issue. I think that's enough for that. 177 at the top. We'll start our sharh next week. Online, guys, we're not here, inshallah. Inshallah, that lesson will not be from Chido. Inshallah. Alright? But a better place? Is that allowed to say that? Of course. Okay. So, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala from Al-Quds, next week, 8 p.m. UK time, inshallah. 10 p.m. local. Allahu Akbar. It isn't the land which makes the people holy. It is Shazad Salim that makes the people holy. Well said, Shazad. Good point. He didn't say that, no? Is that wrong? Yeah? Khalas. Alright, guys, let's have a look here. We got 1 minute. Yep, that's it. It's done. Barakallahu feekum. Guys, I'm sorry about what if you're late to the premise Fatiha? Then that's okay. That's the one time that it's excused. If you miss the Fatiha, it is excused. Alright, guys, Barakallahu feekum. See you next week. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Wa astaghfiruka Allahumma wa atubu ilayk. Wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.